The air was thick with dust and heat in Abilene, Texas. The late afternoon sun cast a golden haze over the rodeo arena, where hundreds of white cowboy hats turned in unison toward the center ring. The crowd's buzz faded into a hush as a gravelly voice echoed through the loudspeakers. $2 million, Clint Rawlins announced, slow and deliberate. For anyone man enough, or stupid enough, to ride El Diablo 6X. Gasps and nervous chuckles rippled through the bleachers. Clint stood tall behind the gate, silver mustache curling over a smirk, his snakeskin boots planted in the dirt like he owned the earth beneath them. A multi-millionaire rancher and rodeo legend, Clint wasn't offering that money out of generosity. He was making a point. No one could tame his bull. El Diablo wasn't just dangerous. He was a storm on four hooves, scarred, wild-eyed, and mean as hell. As silence settled back over the crowd, movement stirred near the back of the stands. A small figure stepped forward. Thin, dusty, and sunburned, wearing worn jeans, a loose flannel shirt, and boots too big for his feet, Jesse Ray moved toward the arena with a quiet confidence that didn't match his age or his background. He looked maybe 13. Maybe. A street kid. No family. No trainer. No sponsors. Just hunger in his eyes, the kind you didn't get from missing meals. The kind that came from being invisible your whole life. "I'll ride him," Jesse said, his voice firm, steady. The crowd erupted in laughter and disbelief. Someone shouted that the kid couldn't even ride a tricycle, let alone a killer bull. Clint Rawlins shook his head and spit in the dirt. "This ain't a pony ride, boy," he sneered. "You got a death wish or just lost your damn mind?" But Jesse didn't flinch. He looked straight into Clint's eyes, unblinking, unfazed. There was something there that made even the seasoned cowboys shift in their boots. Not arrogance. Not stupidity. Conviction. Hank Wallace, the veteran judge, stepped in quietly. "Let him try," he muttered to Clint. "If he dies, it ain't on us." Clint chuckled darkly. "Fine," he said, raising his arms to signal the crowd. "Let's give the boy his shot, and his funeral." Minutes later, Jesse climbed the chute with shaky hands and a clenched jaw. The vest on his back was borrowed, the helmet too big, but his grip on the rope was solid. The gate flew open. El Diablo exploded into the ring. And Jesse stayed on. For 1 second. 2. 3. The crowd went silent. Time froze. And for the first time, it looked like the devil might finally meet his match. Jesse's tiny frame looked impossibly fragile against the brute force of El Diablo 6X. The bull kicked and spun like a tornado with horns, dirt flying in every direction. The crowd gasped with every violent jolt. Most couldn't believe what they were seeing. This scrappy street kid holding on to the most feared beast in the rodeo world. Seconds felt like minutes. And Jesse? He wasn't just surviving. He was flowing with the bull, his body moving like he understood every angry twitch and buck. By the 5th second, even Clint Rawlins leaned forward, the color draining from his face. He'd seen grown men, champions, get launched like rag dolls by this monster. But this boy, he wasn't just riding. He was matching the rhythm of the rage. Jesse's grip was iron. His boots, small as they were, stayed locked. His jaw clenched tight, eyes laser-focused. There was no panic. Just pure, raw determination. At 7 seconds, the crowd was no longer mocking. It was silent. Every breath held. Every eye wide. Somewhere in the chaos, a woman gasped, "My God, he might actually do it." And just as the final second ticked away, 8 full seconds, the horn blasted through the arena. Jesse let go, throwing himself clear as El Diablo bucked one last time and stomped away in fury. The dust hadn't even settled before the entire arena erupted. Some jumped to their feet, screaming. Others just stood there, stunned. Jesse lay still for a moment, chest heaving, blinking against the sun. Then, slowly, he stood, legs trembling, arms scraped, but eyes burning with something fierce and new, pride. Clint Rawlins didn't speak. His mouth was open, but no words came. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost. A $2 million ghost. Hank Wallace walked up to Jesse, eyes wide and shining, and gave a low whistle. "Son," he said, voice rough, "I don't know where the hell you came from, but you just made history." Jesse didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply looked up at the man and said, "I didn't do it for money." And then he turned and started walking toward the edge of the arena, the cheers of the crowd behind him growing louder, wilder, more thunderous by the second. But deep inside, under the dust and bruises, Jesse felt something crack open. Not a wound, but a door. One he'd been trying to find his whole life. The moment Jesse stepped out of the arena, the sound hit him like a wave, cheering, whistling, boots stomping the metal stands. He'd never heard his name shouted before. Not like that. Not from so many people. Not like he mattered. But even as strangers reached out to pat his back or shake his hand, Jesse's eyes stayed low, his mind somewhere else. The noise around him only made the quiet inside him louder. Behind the scenes, chaos erupted in a different way. Reporters scrambled to get his name. Sponsors demanded to speak to someone, anyone, representing the boy. Clint Rawlins stormed across the dirt, demanding to see the footage, certain there had to be a mistake. "No way that little punk lasted 8 seconds, he growled. But the timers had confirmed it. The horn had sounded. The ride was real. And worse for Clint, it was on national television. In a dusty corridor behind the stands, Jesse found an old wooden bench and sat down hard. His knees ached. His hands shook slightly, now that the adrenaline had faded. He took a slow breath, finally letting his shoulders drop. For a long time, he just sat there, letting the world spin on without him. He wasn't used to this, the attention, the eyes, the noise. He was used to shadows, to being ignored. An older man approached, his steps careful, his cowboy hat low over weathered eyes. It was Hank Wallace. He didn't say much at first. Just sat beside Jesse, the bench creaking under their weight. "You ever ride a bull before, kid?" he finally asked. Jesse stared ahead, then shook his head slowly. "No, sir." Hank whistled low again. "You got instincts. Hell of a lot of guts, too. But that wasn't just skill out there. That was something else. Something personal." Jesse didn't answer right away. His hands were clasped between his knees, fingernails packed with dirt and blood. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "He reminded me of someone." Hank turned his head slightly. "The bull." Jesse nodded. "My father." Hank didn't laugh. He didn't question. He just gave a slow nod, like he understood more than Jesse was saying. The silence between them said plenty. Because sometimes, the people who leave the deepest scars don't stomp on you with hooves, they walk away with your childhood. Outside, cameras still searched for the boy hero. But Jesse Ray stayed hidden behind the bleachers, lost in memory. The bull was behind him now. But the truth he'd been running from his whole life was galloping closer. The air behind the rodeo bleachers was still, quiet, a strange contrast to the chaos unfolding inside the arena. Jesse sat there like a statue, frozen by the memory he had just confessed. My father. He hadn't spoken those words in years, not out loud. Not to anyone. He didn't know why they came out now. Maybe the pain had been pushed down for too long. Maybe El Diablo's rage had pulled something out of him he couldn't hide anymore. He closed his eyes, and in that stillness, the past came flooding back. The last time Jesse had seen his father was 3 years ago. A screaming match. A slammed door. A belt thrown across a table. His dad, a former bull rider himself, had once been a rising star in the rodeo world, until alcohol took hold. After that, nothing was ever the same. Jesse was 10 when the bruises started. 11 when the apologies stopped. 12 when his father left and never came back. The memory of that night was burned into his mind like a brand. The sound of tires on gravel. The porch light swinging in the wind. Jesse had waited until morning, then another, then another. He stopped counting after the 5th. There were no phone calls. No letters. Just silence. His mother died the following winter, cancer and heartbreak taking her within months. Jesse never cried at the funeral. He didn't know how. Back in the present, Hank Wallace was still sitting beside him, his eyes scanning the dirt. The man didn't push. He just waited. Finally, Jesse said, he used to ride. Said he was better than all of them. Said no bull could throw him off. Hank gave a soft grunt. And was he? Jesse's lips tightened. He was good. Real good. But he rode angry. Just like that bull. He paused, then looked down. He didn't know how to let go. The older man nodded slowly. Some men ride to prove they can't be broken. Others ride because they already are. His voice was gravel and regret. Which one are you, Jesse? The question hung in the air, heavier than the Texas heat. Jesse didn't answer. He wasn't sure yet. All he knew was that for 8 seconds today, he had taken all the pain, rage, and abandonment in his heart and faced it head-on. But something deeper had been unleashed. Riding the bull hadn't brought closure. It had opened a door. And now, for the first time in years, he wanted to know why his father never looked back. The crowd was still buzzing as the rodeo wrapped up, but Jesse had already slipped away. The spotlight, the applause, none of it mattered. The noise faded behind him like a distant storm as he walked through the back corridors of the stadium, past crates of gear and folded bleachers. What mattered now wasn't the bull, or even the money. It was the door that had opened inside him, and the shadows waiting on the other side. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but his feet led him to the rodeo museum behind the main arena. It was a small room, half gift shop and half hall of fame. The walls were covered in old photos and plaques, cowboys frozen in time, all grit and glory. Jesse moved slowly through the space, his eyes scanning every face, every name. And then he stopped. A grainy photograph stared back at him, a young man mid-air, one hand raised, the other gripping a bull rope. His mouth was open in a wild yell, his boots flying above a massive black bull. Below the photo was a name. Tyler Ray, 1997 National Finals qualifier. Jesse's chest tightened. He didn't need a second look. It was him. His father. He stared at the image for a long time, trying to connect the man in the frame with the broken, angry figure from his childhood. The Tyler in the photo looked free. Alive. Not drunk or bitter. Not dangerous. And yet, Jesse remembered the bruises. The silence. The nights he cried into a pillow so no one would hear. The man in that frame had vanished long before he left the house. A voice behind him broke the stillness. You knew Tyler? Jesse turned to see an older woman wearing a rodeo volunteer badge. She had kind eyes and silver streaks in her braid. He was my dad, Jesse said softly. The woman's face changed, surprise, then sadness. I haven't seen him in years, she said. He used to come around here. After the accident, well, he wasn't the same. Jesse froze. What accident? The woman glanced away, then leaned in slightly. Bull stomped his leg bad. Shattered his femur. Doc said he'd never ride again. He left town not long after that. For the first time, Jesse felt something shift. A reason. A crack in the cold wall he'd built around his father. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a thread, and Jesse intended to pull it until he found where it led. The sky had turned to ash by the time Jesse left the museum, clouds hanging low over the rodeo grounds like they knew something was coming. He walked with his hands deep in his pockets, the photo of his father etched into his memory. The wild look in Tyler Ray's eyes. The raw power. It didn't make sense. How could that man have become the one Jesse remembered? The one who drank through dinner and vanished in the middle of a thunderstorm? He needed answers. Real ones. So he went to the only place in town where stories traveled faster than dust, Mabel's Diner. It sat on the edge of Main Street, open 24 hours, its neon sign buzzing quietly in the night. Cowboys, drifters, and old-timers all gathered there, and Jesse knew if his father had ever passed through, someone in that booth-lined room would remember. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. The scent of bacon grease and burnt coffee wrapped around him. Mabel herself stood behind the counter, wiping it down like she had 1,000 times before. Her eyes narrowed when she saw him, not suspicious, but curious. "You lost, kid?" she asked. "No, ma'am," Jesse replied. "I'm looking for someone." He walked up and placed his fingers gently on the counter. Tyler Ray. Used to be a bull rider. Might have passed through here years ago. At that, one of the old men in the corner raised an eyebrow. Another put down his fork. Mabel tilted her head. "Tyler Ray," she echoed, like testing a name that didn't taste right. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. "Yeah, I remember him. Came through about 4, maybe 5 years ago. Limped bad. Real quiet. Sat right there in that corner booth, drank black coffee like it was holy water." Jesse's heart thudded. Did he say where he was going? "Didn't talk much," she said, her voice softer now. "But he left behind a scrap of paper. Had a name and a town. We figured it was family or someone he owed money to. I kept it for some reason. Just felt like someone might come looking someday." She walked to the back, rummaged through a drawer, and returned with a yellowed piece of paper. Jesse took it with trembling fingers. It had 2 words, Cody, Wyoming. And underneath, Ellen. Jesse didn't know who Ellen was, but one thing was clear, the trail wasn't cold. It was waiting. And with every step closer, he felt both fear and something far more dangerous, hope. Jesse hadn't been on a bus in years, and never for this long. The Greyhound rolled through miles of open land, its windows framing ranches, mountains, and towns that seemed frozen in time. As the Texas flatlands gave way to Wyoming's wild ridges, Jesse stared out at the blur of scenery, his thoughts noisier than the engine beneath him. What if he's dead? What if he doesn't want to see me? What if I hate him all over again? The slip of paper Mabel had given him was folded tightly in his fist. Cody, Wyoming, Ellen. That name was now his only lead. He didn't know who Ellen was. A friend, a girlfriend, someone his father owed, maybe even someone who hated him. But Jesse clung to it like a lifeline. Every hour that passed made the knot in his stomach tighter. Every mile made the questions louder. The bus stopped briefly in Cheyenne, then again in Casper. Jesse didn't get off. He didn't eat. He barely blinked. Somewhere in the early morning hours, he dreamed of the bull again. El Diablo 6X. But this time, when he looked down at the beast, it wasn't a bull at all. It was his father. Eyes wild, mouth snarling. Jesse tried to hold on, but the rope slipped from his hand, and he woke up drenched in sweat, fists clenched around nothing. By the time the bus pulled into Cody's small depot, the sun was just rising over the Rockies. The air was thinner here. Colder. Jesse stepped off the bus and felt like he'd landed in a dream. Wooden storefronts, hand-painted signs, and cowboys who looked like they hadn't aged since the 60s. Everything about this place felt like a story waiting to be finished. He found a payphone outside a gas station, the kind people barely used anymore. He slid in the crumpled paper and read the name again. Ellen. No last name. No number. No address. He swallowed hard, then walked inside and approached the cashier, a tired woman in her 40s with a name tag that read, Karen. "Ma'am," Jesse said, voice steady but quiet, "I'm looking for someone named Ellen. She might have lived here a few years back." She knew a man named Tyler Ray. Karen froze, then slowly turned to face him. "Ellen who?" she asked. I don't know," Jesse admitted. "But she's my only lead. Please." She studied his face. Something in his eyes must have clicked. "Wait here," she said. "I think I know who you're talking about." Karen disappeared into the back of the gas station, leaving Jesse alone near the coffee machine. His fingers tapped nervously on the counter. A man walked by without looking at him, and the radio played soft country music that made the silence feel even heavier. Jesse's heart pounded like boots on wood. For a moment, he wondered if this had all been a mistake, chasing ghosts, following a name on a scrap of paper like it meant something. But then Karen returned, holding a small slip of notepaper. "Her name's Ellen Brooks. Lives about 15 minutes outside town, off an old ranch road. She used to come in here every now and then, always kept to herself. Nice woman. Real quiet." Karen paused before handing Jesse the note. "You sure you're ready for whatever you're gonna find out there?" "I have to be," Jesse said, even though he wasn't sure. The taxi ride was silent except for the crunch of gravel under the tires. The driver didn't ask questions, just followed the directions. The ranch appeared like a painting from the past, a faded red barn, a crooked mailbox, and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. Jesse stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the earth. Before he could knock, the door opened. Ellen Brooks stood there. Mid-60s, sharp eyes, silver hair pulled into a long braid. She looked at Jesse for a long time before speaking. "I knew you'd come one day," she said. Jesse blinked. "You knew who I was?" She nodded slowly. "Your father told me about you. Not much, but enough." She stepped aside and motioned him in. The living room smelled of cedar and old books. Photos lined the walls, rodeo days, horses, a younger Tyler Ray with a smile Jesse barely recognized. On the mantel sat a pair of worn gloves, folded neatly. "He stayed here for a while," Ellen said, voice calm but sad. "After his injury. After he lost everything. He was angry at the world. At himself. But more than anything, he was ashamed." "Why didn't he come back?" Jesse asked, his throat tightening. Ellen looked at him with eyes that had clearly seen too much. "Because he thought you'd be better off without him." Jesse turned away, pain rising in his chest like fire. The boy who'd ridden El Diablo didn't feel brave now. He felt hollow. Because he hadn't expected forgiveness. But he hadn't expected this kind of abandonment wrapped in guilt, either. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a question was forming, not just where his father had gone, but whether he was still alive. Ellen poured Jesse a cup of black coffee and sat across from him, the light from the kitchen window catching the lines in her face. She didn't rush the conversation. She just let him sit there, silent, heavy, wrecked by everything he'd just heard. Jesse stared into the steam rising from the cup, as if hoping to find answers in its swirl. But what he really wanted couldn't be poured or spoken. He wanted something that might not even exist anymore. A reason. "He stayed here for 6 months, Ellen finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did some ranch work. Tried to get clean. He never stopped limping or blaming himself. For the injury. For the drinking. For you." Jesse looked up, his eyes raw. "Did he ever try to find me?" Ellen hesitated. "He wanted to. But every time he got close, he pulled back. He thought you'd grown to hate him. Maybe he thought you should." She took a slow sip. "One day, he packed up and left. Didn't say goodbye. Just left a note on the table. Said he was going north. Said he didn't want to bring his darkness back into your life. The words hit Jesse like a punch to the ribs. For years, he'd told himself his father had stopped caring. That he was too drunk or too proud to come back. But now the truth was messier. And in some ways, even harder to carry. Tyler Ray hadn't been heartless. He'd been ashamed. And Jesse didn't know what to do with that. He stood and walked to the photos on the wall, staring at the younger version of the man he hated and missed in equal measure. In one picture, Tyler was holding a trophy. In another, he was on a horse, smiling at the camera, the same crooked grin Jesse sometimes saw in the mirror. He touched the frame, then turned back to Ellen. "Do you think he's still out there?" She nodded once. "I do. Last I heard, he was working up in Montana. Ranch called Double Creek. Quiet place. He never stayed long anywhere, but maybe this time he did." Jesse took the address Ellen handed him, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his back pocket. He didn't speak, but something had changed in his eyes. He no longer looked like the boy who had ridden a bull for glory. He looked like someone who was finally ready to face what broke him. Because some rides don't end when the buzzer sounds. Some rides are just beginning. The dirt road to Double Creek Ranch twisted through pine trees and fields kissed by frost. Jesse could see the mountains in the distance, sharp and cold like the questions still sitting in his chest. The pickup truck Ellen had loaned him rattled as it climbed the final hill. He didn't know what he expected to find. Maybe an old drunk limping through chores. Maybe a man too broken to speak. Maybe nothing at all. But when he pulled up to the barn, a tall man in a worn denim jacket was stacking hay. The limp was still there, but his hands moved with purpose. His face was older, harder, but Jesse knew instantly. This was him. Tyler Ray. Tyler turned, wiping sweat from his brow. His eyes landed on Jesse, and for a long, aching moment, neither of them spoke. The silence said everything. Years of absence, pain, guilt, longing. Jesse stepped forward slowly, hands shaking, and said the only thing that felt honest. "I rode a bull. 8 seconds. El Diablo 6X. Tyler blinked, stunned. "You what?" "I did it," Jesse said, voice cracking. "I didn't do it for money. I did it because I needed to prove I could face something that scared the hell out of me." He paused. "You?" Tyler's jaw clenched. He looked away, his body stiff. "I didn't come back because I didn't think I deserved to." Jesse swallowed the lump in his throat. "Maybe you didn't. Maybe you still don't. But I came all this way because I needed to know why you left. I needed to hear it from you." For a moment, Tyler said nothing. Then, finally, he spoke, softly, brokenly. "I was a coward. I lost everything. My ride. Your mom. You. And I thought walking away would protect you from the worst parts of me." His voice caught. "But I see now. Leaving just became the worst part." They stood in silence again, the air between them heavier than the sky. And then, slowly, Tyler reached out a hand. Not to shake, not to beg, just to offer. Jesse stared at it, then took it. They didn't cry. They didn't collapse into each other's arms. They just stood there, two riders, broken in different ways, choosing to stand anyway. Weeks later, Jesse returned to Abilene. He didn't ride again. He didn't need to. Because the hardest 8 seconds of his life weren't on the back of a bull. They were the moments he walked toward the man who broke him, and chose not to walk away.